fine. And you can tell that I'm a high school teacher because I just assumed everyone knew my name and forgot to put my name up here. Thank you. I got involved with CAS, the Colorado Archaeology Society, because of Alice Hamilton, so thank you for making your donations. It's greatly appreciated by all the master's students. We love having financial aid with all these things while we're being poor and great in those large classes. So, what is Poggio Civitate? So Poggio Civitate is a hill in Tuscany that I've worked at for 7 summers, as Linda said, as an area director, teaching college students how to do archaeology, yes, for a much more expensive price. So if you want to get some experience beforehand, definitely take advantage of these classes because they are significantly cheaper than coming here. But it is a beautiful site. So today I have a couple of objectives I'd like to go through. Just to give a basic introduction to the site, since Etruscans may not be in the forefront of everyone's knowledge, to talk about the 2012 and 2013 seasons, to talk about how it's connected and the implications of these recent finds, and then to talk about what we hopefully wish to accomplish in the future. So where is Poggio Civitate, this challenging site to pronounce? It's 26 kilometers south of Siena. This thing is awesome, by the way. As a high school teacher, I wish I had a screen this big. So it's about 3 hours north of Rome on bus or train. And you can see it, Siena's up here at the top, and Poggio Civitate is down here. It's in the middle of woods. You have to hike to it. We stay in Vescovato right there. It's about a half-hour hike in the morning, bleary-eyed, tired, exhausted. Sometimes we're maybe hyped up on the espresso we've taken for breakfast. And it spans a good chunk of history. It goes from the 10th all the way up through the 6th centuries BCE. Between the 10th and the 8th century, there was a small population. There was possibly some burials on the western edge of our hill. We found some occupation levels below the 7th century occupation level, and we may have found an abandoned hut. These are some of the remains from the potential burials. They're a little robbed out, so it's kind of hard to tell if they actually were burials. There's no human remains, which would have been a definite nail in the coffin. But the makeup of the material with the bronze arrowhead, the tip of a knife, and then this handle, which is found on burial urns, seems to point in that direction. Here we have the outline of our abandoned Iron Age hut that was later used as a trash dump. Shows how much they cared. There was a transitional period. The site definitely continued to be occupied. There was no abandonment of it or reoccupation. In 2011, the museum finally got a grant to clean this bronze cauldron, which is definitely 7th century. And it was full of dirt. The excavators dug it up, put it in the museum, said, that's good. And that was dug up in 1971, so in the museum for 40 years without being taken care of. And so while they were removing the dirt, they ended up finding this bronze or Iron Age axe. And so we have a definite, this was like the nail, we've always said, oh yes, it's continually been occupied, but this was the nail in the coffin. This site has been continually occupied since the 10th century. And this axe has some sort of religious or political significance for the inhabitants of our site. The Orientalizing Period is what the name we give to the 7th century. We also call it the Urbanization Period. This is a time of great growth and consolidation throughout all of Tuscany. And our site develops these 3 large buildings that you can see here in this illustration. The workshop here, which is an open-air workshop, a residence hall, and then a religious structure, which just recently has been declared more definitively as a religious structure. These are the earliest known terracotta roofs we have in Italy. Don't let any Greek scholar tell you otherwise. We definitely beat them. And we have these lovely decorations, these vegetal lotus palmette decorations that cover the roofs of these structures. And then there's very fine craftsmanship. Here's a dedicatory vessel that we found in the religious structure, and then a bone head, which is just one example of thousands of fragments, which would have been covering furniture throughout the complex area. It was unfortunately destroyed by a fire around 600, 580 BCE. It seems to be accidental. We have evidence, and I'll show you in a later slide, of people running for their lives out of the workshop and forgetting that they had put tiles down on the floor, and we have one of the footprints of these Etruscans. So it seems to have been accidentally destroyed, but then right away they began rebuilding in the period, the 6th century, which we call the Archaic Period. The Archaic Period is known for its huge monumental terracotta roofs with these seated figurines and sphinxes and other fantastical figures, and also these frieze plaques. If you look up Poggio Civitate or Merlot, these are typically the things that come up first and what our site is best known for. It's a single building this time, though, instead of 3 separate ones, but it seems that they're using it for the same purposes. It's religious in nature in one part, it's workshop in another, it's residence hall in another. So it's single kind of fortified area, which makes sense because at that time there's a lot of conflict going on between the Phoenicians / Carthaginians as well as the Greeks throughout Tuscany, and so this seems to be a very turbulent period. In 550 and 535 BCE, the structure was dismantled. There's hundreds of reasons about why people think it was taken apart. Religious, enemy forces, some other stronger political person in the area. Nobody's really sure. Some people will tell you that they definitely know what happened, but there's so much speculation that we can't be really sure. We do know it was definitely purposefully taken apart. There was a well on the site that was filled with roof tiles and capped off to prevent re-inhabitation of the site. We have now 2 confirmed deposits where they would have taken these large seated figures and sphinxes and other characters that would have lined the roofs of the structure, and they were buried ritualistically, and then the site was never inhabited again. There's a medieval road that runs through the site. We found a Roman coin, and we found some medieval pottery, but it's all, it looks like traveler's debris. They lost it while they were traveling through the area. Here are just those decorative tiles that I was talking about that would have covered the beams of the building. We have a banquet here. You can see the couch with the dog under it waiting for scraps and them sitting up here dining. The Etruscans are known for their feasting. We have a horse race. It's not the origins of the Palio that's in Siena, even though some French scholar thinks so. Here we have 2 sets of figures seated here, believed to be divine, although we're not really sure. It could be political in nature. And then here we have a wedding scene with the bride and a member of her household coming underneath this umbrella being drawn on a carriage. And there we have an old reconstruction of what the archaic building would have looked like. The newer computer-generated models have structures going off the north and south, which appear to be defensive in nature. So adding to the idea that this is a tumultuous period, which is why they needed a 4-walled structure as opposed to the open-air structure of the Orientalizing period. Now, in the 2012 and 2013 seasons, we've shifted focus, and actually we've been shifting focus throughout the 2000s from this monumental structure, which you can see here. Here in red is the Orientalizing, and in blue is the archaic structure, which is clearly elite, clearly an aristocratic family that controls a lot of power in the area, to the non-elites. The family that occupied this structure is a an extended family, grandparents, aunts and uncles, sort of deal, living in one area, but 20 to 30 people, and the roofs alone, the amount of roof tile needed is well beyond what they could have mustered in terms of labor. And so we've been searching since the early 2000s for these non-elites. So here we have an example of that. One small example of a workman's presence there. This is the footprint, which in this very destroyed tile that would have been one of the laborers working in the workshop. And so that's where our shift has been, from this lovely gold is easy to appreciate and find their beauty, and to this less than beautiful foot tile that was kind of destroyed in a fire. So we've searched all over the hill for these non-elite occupants, down here to the south, and then over here in Civitate, what is known as Civitate A and Civitate B. We found scant remnants of it, possible burials, a well, the abandoned hut, and we've moved out this way, and we slowly have been moving our way back to the main area where the buildings are on Piano del Tesoro. And so this area right here off the corner is where our last 2 seasons have focused. They've been focusing on either side of this medieval road here that runs through the site, and it's hard to date roads, especially in Tuscany, where the violent rains of the wintertime and actually sometimes in the summer wash away a lot of the soil. So it's hard to say if this was an Etruscan road, but it seems to be the most logical area. And so that's what our working hypothesis is the medieval road had dated back to the Etruscan times, and that's where we keep kind of focusing on either side of it. So in 2012, we sent off these 2 archaeologists, one who's in the audience and probably blushing now that I posted this picture of her up here, Grayson and Alyssa, into the woods, not really expecting much, just seeing what was over there. There's these scatters of rocks there. We weren't really sure what was going on. And pretty quickly, it became apparent that we had stumbled upon something interesting. The soil is not deep. We're on the top of a hill, so there's a lot of erosion there. And we quickly came upon these lines of rocks that seemed to be a little too straight to have been geologic or erosional material. And so as you can see, they've expanded out to either side, and here's the start of another trench right over there. And we began to kind of more and more systematically explore the area. And by the end of the season in 2012, we ended up with this. We ended up with a line of rocks here, one here, and another one over here with this kind of interesting packing. It seems to have tapered off over this side, and we weren't really sure what was going on over there. The materials coming out of there were a lot of production materials. Here we have an antler that was carved into the shape of a hammer. Here we have the remnants of what would have been a crucible for holding melted metal. Here we have some of the more finished products, bronze, little doodad, which I'm not really sure what it would have attached to. Doodad's my scientific term there. And then these lead coils. And so they're clearly working with metal here. We also had a lot of trash left over from the metal. These 4 items on the side are known as slag, and that's the remnants from breaking apart and melting down the rocks to extract iron ore from it to produce iron implements, like that bronze knife that I showed earlier. And then in the middle, we have some more terracotta vessels with adhered pieces of that slag. So there's a lot of this metal production material here, and we're thinking, oh, great, we found another workshop. But then there's also these other materials that we're not really sure what were going on here. These 2 over here are spindle whorls. They would have been used to create thread at the site for weaving. And then this is the handle, a very typical handle that would have been found on the lid of a cooking pot for like a casserole dish nowadays. And so we're finding these household items in here which are interesting to see mixed in, but not unusual. So in 2013, we opened up the area again after it had obviously been a very wet winter and grown over, as seen here. This is where that picture was just taken. And we began excavations in that area, expanding around our original excavation. And like I said, we're a field school. We bring college students here, so there's a lot of people who come and work at the site and that we end up teaching. And this year, we had one of our former students come back, Ryan Baker, right here, and he has started a company called Archaeology out of Texas. If anyone's interested, I can get you guys his contact information, but he is producing these lightweight helicopters to do aerial photography for very cheap. And so it was great this year that we had him with us every day, taking photographs from above. That first photo I showed of back a few slides of the area expanded, that was taken by Grayson on the top of a ladder that we were holding up against a tree that was probably like this thick. Probably not OSHA safe, but luckily the Italians don't really check on us there. So this was a much safer way, a much safer way of doing this, except the takeoff and landing part is terrifying because these things the blades spin so fast. But with that, at the end of the season, we were able to create this mosaic of all the trenches and giving us a very clear view of what was going on. So here in the middle, we have the original trench that started and ended in 2012 with its parallel lines of rocks. And then we expanded over here and found another packing of rocks. And we expanded to the south, and we found a lovely linear packing of rocks. And we expanded to the west and found more linear packings of rocks. And there's a lot of rocks packed on rocks here, and it's kind of confusing when you look at it with just the original, with the soil mixed in there. And so myself and Grayson worked together to help produce an AutoCAD version of it. And so here it is kind of cleaned up. And so we've identified a couple of different areas in these rocks that seem to be following a pattern. We have this blue triangle, which unfortunately I couldn't find the northern extent of, but we found pretty solid southern wall and eastern and western walls in a very nice rectangular pattern. We also seem to have this slightly curving line that kind of dives out underneath here. And what we were thinking is that these could be the foundations of two different periods of occupation. We have a foundation of a curvilinear structure or a hut, which we have already had evidence for on the site. And then this rectilinear structure, which we clearly have evidence for in the monumental side. And so here we have a close-up of one of those walls. You can see it running through here. And this is looking at it towards the south. And we have this lovely L-shaped structure, which we originally thought was a hearth, but it doesn't seem to have the right burn structure connected with it. There's no red or blackened soil around there. And so we think that we have these two structures right here, which is great. Some people are occupying this site over here in this area. And then we have a series of parallel lines. One up here to the north, which distinctly drops off. And then one here to the south, which runs pretty close to the border of the road. These seem to be some sort of terracing. If you've ever been to Tuscany in either the wintertime or in one of their horrible thunderstorms in the summer, you know that it downpours rain on everyone, and the soils just wash out. The medieval road and that we walk up to several times this summer was washed away. And actually, unfortunately, just recently, they had some horrible winter storms that took out roads further down in the valley. We're not sure of what has happened at our site. We're hoping that everything's okay. But the rains are very, very powerful there. It's not unlike what happened up in Boulder recently. So we have what seems to be backings for holding the soil onto the hill to prevent it washing off when we have these torrential downpours. And then we go back to these parallel lines here in the middle that seem to not be strong enough to hold up a roof, but seem to be substantial and regular enough that it's some sort of walled structure. So, and here we have Lucy bailing out after one of our torrential downpours this summer, the upper terrace. You can see Rob here sitting, contemplating the work that he has ahead of him as he's digging this out. And you can see how steep of a drop-off it is, but it seems to level out down here at the same level of the trench over here. And here we are again at the end of the season with our parallel structures of rocks through the middle. We didn't do much work in there this past summer. This is mostly the same as from 2012. So what were we finding in the 2013 season? Well, we continue to find evidence of metal production. Here we have some slag, more slag, and then over here we have some nice evidence of fornos. Fornos are the ovens that would have been used to superheat charcoal to help melt down the metal and extract it from the ore that we would then use to either cast or pour into molds the metal. And here's some of the finished products that we found this year. We have a leech pin fibula, and we have just a regular bow one, and we have this lovely example of a square bronze rod with a bone bead attached to it. And fibula are just a fancy Italian or Latin term, actually, as some of my students can tell you, for just a safety pin. These are ornamental safety pins you would have worn on your toga or your tunic. And the bone beads seem to be just, well, for lack of a better term, bling to decorate it. And so we definitely have evidence of metal production and fine metal production here, similar to stuff that's in the Orientalizing period. But then in this past year, we found a lot of worked antler and worked bone. They were working bone and antler to create those beautiful, the beautiful bone head I showed you earlier, and then different guilloche patterns and meanders to decorate their furniture. They would have nailed these onto the side of furniture. And so you can see how they cut away here, a section of antler, and you got even some saw marks here. And this is another piece of antler. So we're finding a lot of worked antler. We also ended up finding fragments of amber, which are very rare on the site. This was like the weirdest thing we found, one of the weirdest things we found this summer. We were like, we have no idea what it was. And it wasn't until it got to the lab and cleaned up that our conservator, Steve, was able to identify it as amber. And so they're working things other than metal in this area. And here we have a stone tool that probably would have been used as some sort of hammer, maybe to attach these bone appliques or to help to chisel into some of them and do the carvings that would have been needed. So we're finding other types of production in this area as well, which isn't uncommon. In the 7th century, that large open-air workshop has multiple uses going on there. So we're still, okay, workshop, great. But then we find all these household items. We find more spindle whorls, and some of them are kind of ugly. This is a roquetto, which would have been a spool to hold thread. And it's kind of chunky, not as elegant as some of the ones that you find in the elite burials further south. We also find strap handles to drinking cups. And then here's an attachment point of another one that are nicely decorated. And so there's this mix of kind of crude material and also fine materials in this same area. And then you go into what time period are we dealing with here? Here we have a St. Dominican medal from the 13th and 14th century, found very early on in the season, much in the topsoil. And then we have this decorative terracotta piece, which would have been on the side of the Archaic building. And then we have this leech fibula, which would have been in the early Orientalizing period. And so we have all these periods stacked really close to one another. But if you noticed, when I showed you the excavation photos and when we go back to them, it's a very shallow area and obviously prone to a lot of erosion through the area. And so it is possible that all this stuff is stacked really close to one another in the air, on top of one another, and without very much distinction between the periods. And so we've been lucky enough that we've had a GIS expert on site, a Geographic Information Systems. And so he's been doing tons of maps of the area for us. And so he did a heat distribution map for the slag and slag-related materials, the crucibles and the fornos that were used to produce it. And we noticed that over here to the east, to the west, we find a heavy concentration of a lot of these materials back in the original 2012 trenches. And then we look at carved and worked bone, and a lot of it is occurring over here just on the outside of where the buildings were. And if we bring this map up, those bone, they don't lie perfectly one-to-one. But those bones, a lot of those bones are being found just on the outside. And this is bone that's both been worked as well as cut or butchered for consumption. And so it seems that we have a combination area of both workshop and habitation, that somebody is living here in this rectilinear structure and discarding bones that also sometimes are carved and used for decorations that are found typically in residence structures. And then over here, we have a lot of metal production going on, in that these small walls are somehow being used to help protect the fires that are being created, both from spreading as well as from the winds, unneeded winds that would have caused flare-ups and problems in this very delicate process. Metalworking has to be taken very seriously and controlled throughout the whole process, or else you could end up burning down your entire hill, as they did in the 7th century. And so these seem to be some sort of walls there, possibly being used for protection. A couple of extraordinary finds that we had in 2013 were also kind of eye-catching ones. Over here, we have a terracotta doodad, another doodad. And we weren't really sure what it was at first. But if you look closely enough, you can start to see the bridge of what could be a nose and the depressions of what could be eyes. And it seems that what happened, or what this is a head, some sort of small head. There's theories going around now that it's the household gods of these people here, that it was maybe just a toy for a little child. There's still a lot of speculation on what this actually is, because we didn't find any other parts of it. We just found what seems to be the head. But it points to residential type activities going on here, either worship of a household god, a household protective god, or a toy just simply for a child there. Over here is one of probably the more gruesome aspects of what we found this past summer. This is was found in my trench, and we thought it was just an animal bone at first, but we luckily have had a zooarchaeologist there. This is the upper part of a femur of an infant. An infant, 8 to 9 months in the womb, 2 months after birth. It's really hard to date narrower than that, but it's obviously a very young baby who seems to have passed away, and it was discarded outside of the house-like structure. It's interesting that we're finding these things. Since we've hired the zooarchaeologist to come work with us, we found a lot of fragments of infant bones scattered throughout the site that were picked up by archaeologists thinking that it was just another animal bone, cow or pig or goat. We have tons of pigs at our site. And so we were like, oh, just another one. And it seems that that's not the case, that some of these bones are actually human bones. And it's kind of redefining our understanding of how the Etruscans deal with infant mortality. It seems that these infants are not a part of society, and that they are discarded in a very non-ceremonial way, which to us seems very crude and insensitive, but to the Etruscans is just a way of life dealing with what probably was a high issue. We're still doing a lot of research with this, and we're still confirming that this is a human bone, but Sarah Kanza said that she is 98% sure that this is human, and she just wants to have the human osteologist look at it before we give the final stamp of approval. But since she's come in, we found about 10 or so fragments from past years of human bones. Unfortunately, we didn't know where they were. And this one, luckily enough, we were able to pinpoint a very small area of the trench that I was working in, so that we can definitely say that these are being discarded with the animal bones and the animal refuse in a non-ceremonial fashion. So what does this area mean with the rest of the hill? Well, it means that we're continuing to find areas of non-elite occupation that were moving off from the western side and to the southern side. This is that hut structure that I talked about earlier, that's south of the hill, east of where we were. There also seems to be poor burials that were robbed out. They have very few fragments of pottery left, not really well preserved, kind of what we would expect of a lower class citizen being buried. And those are being found on the western part of the hill in the area known as Civitate B. And then we have this archaic well. This is the well that was packed full of ceiling tiles. And it's 100 meters west of where our monumental buildings are. So it's not practical for the occupants of the hill to just use this well. It seems that it's serving a local population. We have a very low water table. As you saw, when we dig trenches, we gather a lot of water when it rains. And so it would have made more sense for them to dug a to dug a well within the monumental building or closer to it than 100 meters away. And so we have these small pockets of occupation going on around the monumental structure. Oh, that's right, I gave you guys a little help with it because it's hard to see sometimes. And so what we seem to have through this area of excavations from 2012 and 2013 is another example of non-elite occupation, but also a production area for the people living in the monumental structures. Here we have our rectangular building again, which seems to be occupied, where people are eating in it. And then over here we have these the metal production areas that are kind of being left alone, seem to be separated a little bit, but not too far from where someone was living. I'd like to give thanks and credit for a lot of this. This is I'm not obviously out there being Indiana Jones, doing it all myself. We have amazing students who come and work with us every year. We try and publish our stuff very quickly, and so those are the two sites that we publish to. I have to thank Ryan Baker for the photography, the Arc aerial photography. He's done an amazing job, and actually he's been working in Belize and in San Giovanni, and I guess he's been doing vineyard stuff too. He's doing some amazing stuff with Arc aerial. And then Grayson for a lot of the amazing photographs that you saw. He has a photograph studio down in Austin, Texas, Seventh Seal Photography. And I want to let you guys know, you don't have to take my word for what happened, or the assumptions we're making of Poggio Civitate at all. You can do it too. We pride ourselves in publishing almost in real time all of our artifacts. They get published every year at the end of our dig season at this website, poggiocivitate.classics.umass.edu. Sometimes the links are frustrating and they don't always work and they're dead links, but most of the time they do. And you can look and read about what we were actually finding there. And that's one of the great things that we find is that you don't have to take my word for it. You guys can go out and do the research yourself, unless you're too busy, in which case, then you can take my word for it. So what are we expecting for next year? Well, we're expecting to expand eastward and northward. We've been having trouble with the landowners, but it seems that that's finally starting to get sorted out. That's one of the things about this site and why it hasn't been turned into a major archaeological site like Volci or Tarquinia or Cervetri, is that it's owned privately by different landowners. And so we think we've sorted out our issues with the owners just to the east of us, and we're hopefully going to go over there and expand to see if there's more parallel structures of these rocks going in the area. We're also going to continue to make soundings below the floor to try and understand the stratigraphic materials that are going on. Like I said, it's all very densely packed in. You're finding all this stuff within half a meter of the surface. And so we still need a lot more control to confirm that we're dealing with something that seems to be pointing to the Orientalizing period, because that's where the majority of our artifacts are coming from. And then we're hoping to start to explore more periphery areas in and around Tuscany, both in Vescovado and in other areas, just to try and get an idea of what's going on beyond this monumental structure, to see other non-elite populations in these other areas. And that is the end of my talk. I can take questions now, or I can wait until after you guys do your... Now? Okay. So are there any questions that I could possibly answer? Yes? Mm-hmm.
Did it appear to have been dismantled with some care or idea toward reuse of the materials or vandalized?
No, the dismantling of the monumental archaic building seems to have been one of vandalization. We have tile spreads of just the tiles, like as if they tied on a rope and pulled down the walls. The walls are also mud brick, and so it doesn't make much sense for them to reuse it when you can easily make another one. It definitely seems to be one of some sort of vandalization. Why, though, is where that's still up in the air. Other questions? Yes? Oh. You can go first, yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. I've only had any experience in U.S. archaeology. After you have a group of artifacts, where do they actually go?
Oh, yeah. We have a magazzino, which is the Italian word for storeroom, hosted in the town of Merlot, which is also where we have the local museum that's dedicated to this site. The students every year our students are watched by the conservator of our site who guides them in the process of conservation. They get cataloged and published in the database and then stored in boxes down in the magazzino. There's hope in the future of doing more exhibits with the museum. This past summer we did one with our inscriptional evidence. We posted a lot of our put up a lot of our inscriptions in the museum as a small exhibit, and we're hoping to do more of that in the future. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of money in this museum. It's a small rural town. People don't usually go to Merlot to check out the museum, so it doesn't have a lot of money to be able to take care of the artifacts, so we kind of hold on to them most of the time.
I had one other one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of familiar in the U.S. of the rules about getting permission to do an archaeology dig on private land and
Mm-hmm.
public land. What is it like here?
We have to get permission again. We have to get permission from the landowners to be on the land. We have to get permission from the agricultural ministry to be doing any sort of vegetation cut-in, especially in the springtime. You're not supposed to technically do clearing in the springtime, so we have to get permission from them. And then we have the Superintendenza of Florence that gives our final approval for archaeological digs. Most in Italy, and I think this is true in a lot of other classical sites, the Italians don't own what's underneath the ground. Like the landowners don't own these artifacts. It's the government that actually owns them. And this landowner to the east that's been giving us trouble was like, oh, you're finding gold and not giving me my fair share. The government did an audit of all the stuff we found, and even if we were to pay for the stuff, it's only €100. It's only valued at €100, so we're not finding very valuable things there. But it's still technically owned by the Italian government. So once we find it, it's owned by the government. Mm-hmm.
Near the beginning of your talk, you had something that was like a ceramic disc or something with some writing on it.
Yes.
What language was that? You didn't say.
That was an Etruscan, and it's a Mulawanike inscription. So it's a person, Weltor is the name, the personal name, dedicated that, and we find those in a lot of temple religious-like structures throughout Etruria, Mulawanikes, where I dedicate this to a god. We don't, unfortunately, the inscription breaks before we find out that information, but we have a large personal name, plus the dedicatory word Mulawanike that shows that it's being dedicated to some sort of deity. Which kind, we aren't really sure, but that's what it said around the base there, which is why we can say that building that has been questionable about whether or not it was religious, we can be more confident that it was religious, because that's the type of inscription you only find in a temple structure.
Were they pretty much using Greek letters?
Yes, yeah. The Etruscan alphabet got inherited somewhere between 750 and 700 BCE from the Euboean Greeks. So these are the Greeks that came to southern Italy around Cumae and Naples. There's interaction that's going on between a trade partnership going on between the Greeks and the Etruscans, and that's where the Etruscans inherit their alphabet from. Yes.
Lines of rocks that you see, do you conceive of those as foundations?
Yes, that's.
Then what do you imagine as a superstructure?
Well, that's where we're still kind of unsure of what the superstructure is. We are envisioning these as light foundations for mud brick walls, similar to what would have been used on the hill, the monumental part of the hill. The monumental structures, however, are a good meter wide, while these are about 50 centimeters. And that's where we've been debating. We have some tile here, but definitely not enough for it to have been a tiled structure. And so we're believing now that there is some sort of thatch. There's a river that runs through the valley right next to the hill that in earlier times, before agriculture came to Tuscany, would have been a much more robust river. And we think they're getting common reeds from there to thatch this roof. Although we have a British archaeologist who works with us, and she talks about how thatch can be also a sign of wealth, because thatch rots out very much quicker than terracotta roofs, and so you have to replace it all the time. So there was that aspect of it, and that's why we're still debating it, but it seems that it would have been a thatched roof structure of some kind.
Would you see the walls being something like, well, in this part of the world, wattle and dog?
Yeah, and that's what the same kind of construction going on there. We haven't found any specific post holes, which is why these are all still very tentative. But also we have a lot of erosion to deal with, and so it could have been easily muddled from all the soil movement going on in the hill. There's another theory that we also we're starting to work around and see if that's true, but we haven't found enough support and evidence for it, is that they are robbing out these posts after these are done, because the type of growth that's occurring on the hill is very shrub-like, and so there's not a lot of straight, long trees. And so we think maybe that if you're using straight poles for these buildings, it's a good resource to then take and use again elsewhere. But again, it's a very tentative kind of theory, but it would explain why there's a lack of post hole, like a lack of rotting wood in a post hole shape. We did find a post hole in the hut, which allowed us to kind of clarify and define that area as a hut. But these areas, we haven't been finding that as much, but we're hoping. We also haven't found we haven't found a definite floor. We found the pre-floor area where it's starting to get really compacted, but we didn't find the actual floor. And that was, of course, in the 6th week of our 6-week dig, which is how everything occurs. So that's why one of the goals is to continue to make more controlled soundings, to kind of see where those floors are, to prove that we're actually seeing the very top of where these foundations are. So I could come back next year with another talk and totally have a different theory, but that, I mean, as you guys know, is how archaeology works. So these are just the findings from the last 2 years we've had. Other questions? Yes?
You talked about a good probability of trade with other cultures. I'm curious, are there artifacts that have been found that you feel confident were not produced like at this site by this culture, but were most likely from like a Greek settlement in the south, or the Phoenicians, that would have been acquired through trade?
Not a Greek or a Phoenician settlement, but other Etruscan ones. It's going to be too far ahead back in the slideshow. That cup that has the dedicatory inscription, the fabric of that cup is not related to any fabrics we make on site. We've been blessed that St. Anselm College in New Hampshire has an XRF machine, which is basically an X-ray gun that kind of analyzes the makeup of pottery, how many silicates it has, and how much calcium and whatever other you want to measure. And so we shot it at the cup with the inscription, and that's coming from Volterra area, as well as our Etruscan language specialist Rex Wallace. He's looked at the letter forms there, and those are definitely a Volterran letter form shape, as opposed to the local letter forms, which we have found on ivory tablets, which seem to be different. And so that cup is definitely coming from another site. That's one of the weird things about our site, is that a lot of the material, there's a vast amount of material being produced here, and not a lot of it's being exported. And we have very little coming into the site. We have a few fine artifacts. And so it seems that it's being self-sufficient, but there's got to be some other population, which is why we've been digging for these non-elites. So we don't have any. I take that back. I just remembered there's a Spartan vessel in the Archaic building. Laconian 2, 3? one of those a Laconian vessel. So there is some Greek pottery there, but it's not a lot. And that's how we're able to date it to around 550, 535, the destruction. But it's still minuscule. It's nothing like what you see down in Cervetri or Tarquinia, where you have those huge Greek craters being imported and bronze vessels and all those things being imported to the area. This is very minimal importation. It seems that the area has been very conservative, and what was in the Etruscan times rural farmland has continued to be alfalfa fields and sunflower fields, not much else going on in the area. So it would explain why there's not a lot in the area. But there is some trade, yes?
In terms of the way you actually excavate, is almost all this trowel type excavation?
We do pick and hand sorting as well with a sieve, a control sieve with every third bucket. It's a clay soil, so it's really hard to sieve it all. And also our artifacts are a little more robust. So we can pick. We've found out this year statistically, we did a statistical analysis that we are doing pretty good at recovering all the materials with a hand sort. When we get down to levels like here with the stone packing and here with the well, we were using trowels, but it's not until we find those types of things that we start to pull out the trowels. Although it can very quickly, the trench south of me did all trowel work this past summer because 2 days in she hit stones, and then we wanted to make sure that we didn't blow through a floor, so it quickly converted to trowel work. Yes, you're welcome. Other questions?
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, there was one in the back.
Sorry.
No.
So we're in an area that's terraced
Mm-hmm.
because of the torrential rains.
Mm-hmm.
And also you have, if I understand correctly, you have that hill
Mm-hmm.
to the east where the soil is in before you hit that rock erosion.
Yep.
How reliably can we use things like your heat map in sort of sourcing these artifacts? I mean, can we say this is an antler production, or is this a case of antlers washed down the hill through that wall and stop?
We can use it pretty reliably because I'll go back to it. We found through here vast areas of no antlers and no bones being found, and so it doesn't. If it would have been a wash, we would have found a more widespread scatter, as well as the fact that the antler is actually in pretty good condition. The Cavetto fragment, that decorated fragment that I think right here, this is really worn. Like this, we're pretty sure eroded from further up the hill into topsoil. But the other fragments we're finding about 20 centimeters below the topsoil is not as eroded, and which gives us belief that we're dealing with original deposition areas for these artifacts. That's the same thing that happened with the hut structure over here. This is just below the monumental building, and there's a retaining wall there as well. And so at first everyone came upon it and we're like, oh, Karen, you just found erosional spill. It's nothing exciting. And then they expanded around the area and found that there's no rocks, no artifacts in the immediate area, which means that this is an original deposition area. The same thing is happening over here. But you're right, it is something to call into question because we haven't dug to the east, which would put a nail in the coffin, as I've said a couple times already. I'm sorry for such a morbid example, but it would pretty much seal the deal that we are dealing with an original deposition area. But you're right, it still is tentative. We can't be fully sure until Susan gives us rights to dig on her land. Any other questions? Well, thank you guys for being so kind and listening to me ramble.